Boldwood presents The Runaway, written by Catherine Law and read by Emma Powell. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue. Midsummer's Eve, 1930. Alexa got out of the back seat of the car and stood perfectly still on the gravel drive, clutching her fur stole over her shoulders. Ferris House, high up on the Ennis Point headland, had always been foreboding. The wind-buffeted granite was hard and severe against the often blissful blue Cornish sky, and, Alexa admitted, it had always scared her a little. But this evening, the house was transformed and softened by music, by laughter, by light. The towering front door, propped open by bay trees in copper pots, welcomed her, enticed her to walk to the top of the sweeping stone steps and enter its embrace. As a fleet of cars and taxis continued to pull up the drive behind her, dropping even more guests for the ball, Alexa heard and felt the tinkling conversations of the crowd inside, and her stomach bubbled with nerves. "Are you all right, Alexa? Look lively," teased her father, William, tucking his wallet inside his jet-black dinner jacket, having paid the driver. "You can't be late for your own party." Her stepmother, Eleanor, stopped fiddling with her gloves to link her arm with Alexa's. "We'll see you safely through the door, Alexa," she said. "After that, we won't spoil your fun by hanging around, will we, William? We'll leave you bright young things alone." "Oh, my dear, you are shaking." "I'm desperately trying not to." Alexa took a fortifying breath, lifted the hem of her gown and set off across the gravel with her father and stepmother either side of her, fighting her rising panic and the strong urge to turn and run. "You know it's quicker to walk here from home than motor over," commented William unnecessarily as they tackled the steps, treating them to another of his musings. "Down the cliff footpath from Porthdean, across the quay, back up again. It's simple, and such a fine evening for it. Don't know why I didn't suggest it." Alexa glanced at her father and saw his tongue pressed firmly in his cheek. But Eleanor let out an exasperated little snort. "In these shoes, William, it would be like setting out on one of your hikes over the headland, and frankly, last time you made me do that, it nearly killed me. You can walk home if you like. Alexa and I will certainly be getting a taxi." "He's teasing us, Eleanor," Alexa said, as the sound of swaying music reached her and her knees wobbled as if she'd just stepped off Harvey's boat onto dry land. "Dad, please don't. Now is not the time." Alexa forgave him, took a deep breath, and walked under the grand entrance into the wide hall and the chattering crowd. The scent of flowers and cologne hit the back of her throat, sweet and overwhelming, like a toffee she'd once choked on. "Oh, but how utterly gorgeous," she sighed. Even though the sun lingered in the midsummer sky and the evening promised to unfold, fair and long, candles burned in every room. They burned at windows, on the candelabra and in fireplaces, competing with the last of the sunlight. Champagne bubbles in crystal glasses sparkled, and the diamonds and opals at ladies' throats winked at her. Freesias and pinks, roses and lilies, Harvey knew her favourites, spilled over the edges of urns and trailed around pillars. And there were people, so many people. Alexa guessed at 100 heads, hair oiled or marcelled, here and there a twinkling tiara. The beautiful, not so beautiful, the good and the great of the parish, and indeed the county, were assembled as a joyous melee and were, one by one, turning to look at her. At the bottom of the flight of stairs, where the great banister curved back around itself, Harvey was waiting. She saw him scanning his guests, keeping watch for the door. He spotted her, and his face transformed with innocent pleasure as he began to squeeze his eager way towards her. How the pristine black of evening wear became him. He was dressed identically to every other male guest at the party, but he remained the most attractive man she had ever seen. His wavy, tawny hair was slicked back, and he looked, Alexa decided, quite divine. Her legs stopped working, and she came to a halt, drawing even more attention. Guests parted and began to clap. Alexa took a step back, flummoxed, only to be caught playfully by Eleanor. "You can't escape, Alexa," she whispered in her ear. And suddenly, reassuringly, Harvey was right there, blocking out the others, taking hold of her hand. How wonderful that felt, and making her welcome and warm and wanted. Her plans for her future, her escape to a new life, withered a little. "Happy birthday, Alexa. How beautiful you are," he said. "I'm so glad you are here." "Hello, Harvey," she said, smiling at her best friend. He took 2 champagne coupes from a tray and, with a nod of greeting to William and Eleanor, led Alexa away across the ballroom and out through the French windows onto the terrace where, at last, she could breathe. They walked through sea-fresh air, down the steps and across the pristine lawn, towards the pines that whispered in the evening breeze. Ranks of rhododendrons created black-green dense hollows. Through gaps in the shrubbery, Alexa saw the yellow of the prickly gorse, and beyond the cliff's edge, the pure blue horizon, still bright on this, the longest day. Below her, waves roared against the black rocks of Ennis Point. Alexa turned her back on the view. "The house looks so wonderful, Harvey," she said. "Everything is so light, so sparkling. How have you managed it?" "This is what my mother would have remembered. She once told me what a spectacle the Ferris Midsummer Ball was. She would have loved this." "I'm sure she would have done, Alexa," Harvey said. "But this is for you, remember? I can't think of a better way to celebrate your 18th birthday." Harvey's concentrated stare pinned her like a butterfly, and she shifted her gaze to the koi statues peeking around ancient yews, the gravel pathways into secret bowers behind box hedges, the sky, large, empty and soft over the sea. "The only thing you haven't thought of, Harvey," she said, "is peacocks for your lawn." He looked momentarily disappointed, as if caught out. "Certainly next time," he said. "I will. When I—" Harvey's parents hailed them from the terrace and began to walk across the lawn towards them, his father stooping a little, peering upwards with a wide grin, while his mother held court with broad-shouldered confidence. Arthur's medals were pinned resplendently on his jacket, and Betty's pearls glowed, suggesting ancient treasure. She greeted Alexa with a powdery kiss on her cheek. "My dear girl, you look absolutely divine. You put us all in the shade," Betty said, self-deprecating, even though her precise Scottish accent always made her sound imperious. Arthur placed an affectionate hand on his son's shoulder as if to congratulate him, his watery eyes surveying Alexa.
"Good God, when I saw you, Alexandra, across the lawn, I thought that it was Carlotta standing there. I truly did."
Betty elbowed him. "Goodness, Alexa, do excuse my husband. He doesn't set out to upset you. He means it as an absolute tribute. Your mother was very special to us all." Alexa saw the telltale signs of compassion and pity, for her mother had died exactly 6 years ago, the day before her 12th birthday. "I remember visiting you here with her so many times." Alexa smiled at Harvey's parents, helping them as they stumbled over their kindness. "And I remember us being served the softest buns for tea. The house seemed enormous to me then, as a little girl. And now—" Alexa glanced to the dazzling windows, feeling the spike of her loss as if it had been yesterday. "It is just as huge and wonderful."
"Yeah, but Harvey wanted it this way for you."
"Come on, enough of this," cried Betty, grabbing her husband's arm, pulling him away. "We must circulate, attend to our guests." She threw back over her shoulder. "Don't hog her, Harvey." "I will try not to, Ma," he called. "At least," he said quietly to Alexa, "I will if you want me to." Alexa laughed brightly. He was teasing her, surely, but his face was serious. She heard the spicy syncopation of a jazz number starting up, felt the vibrations distract her. "I want to dance." "I wouldn't expect anything else." Harvey took her hand and led her back inside, where they merged with a dozen other couples. Some older guests marching sedately, the younger ones jigging and dipping, chatting over the music. A warm weight of people. She felt his closeness, his chest so very near her own, with his chin tilted just so and his raised hand delicately balancing her fingers. As he held her, he seemed very grown up compared to the boy she had known all her life. He guided her, supported her, dipped her joyfully at the appropriate moment. She felt her shoulders drop as she relaxed into the steps. She took in the room, the faces, the smiles and laughter, the last embers of sunlight slanting through the large windows. Suddenly, the idea of her suitcase packed and ready, hidden beneath her bed back home at Porthdean, seemed terribly wrong. But she'd made the decision. Her train ticket was bought. Lady Meredith's Cadogan Square address branded into her memory for the moment next week when she stepped off the train at Paddington and into her new life. She was leaving home for London to work for a stranger. She just hadn't found the moment to tell her father and stepmother, or Harvey, for that matter. Tomorrow, she told herself, as Harvey guided her on another circuit of the dance floor. She'd tell them all tomorrow, during the slow morning of recovery. In any case, she thought, her eyes flicking to Harvey's wonderfully familiar face, his clear eyes watching her. He knew that she longed to leave Porthdean. He just didn't know how badly. As the tune came to a halt, she noticed Sarah Carmichael with her punch cup aloft like a barrier, sinking back against the wall, camouflaging herself behind a flower arrangement. Her dress was delicate china blue, simple but flattering, and her fair hair dressed like a confection on her head. She concentrated on the pieces of fruit in her cup, occasionally dipping the tip of her finger, licking it and glancing shyly up at the room. "Dance with Sarah," Alexa said. "Ma said that I was not to hog you, and one must do what Ma says." Alexa gave him a thank you smile and drifted over to the small gathering around the punch bowl where she found her father topping up Eleanor's cup. "Enjoying it so far?" Alexa's stepmother asked, leaving lipstick on the rim. Her hair shimmered blonde in the light of the candles. "Of course, it really is so very wonderful." "I think we'd better dance," said her father. "I'll hold that for you if you like," said Alexa, reaching for Eleanor's cup. "No," said William. "I meant with you." As he led her onto the floor, he confided, "Eleanor has been making me practice, but alas, I fear it has been to no avail." Alexa laughed with affection, remembering her mother once complaining what a bad dancer her father was and how bruised her toes in her thin silk dancing shoes became. "Here goes," said William, guiding Alexa backwards into a rather frenzied jazz tune. "Ferris has really done you proud tonight. He's hired 2 bands, you know, one specializing in slow old-time music for us grown-ups and one for the young folk like you. Must say I know which one I prefer." They bumped straight into Harvey and Sarah dancing in the other direction. "Please excuse us," said William. "My dancing lessons have not paid off." But Harvey and Sarah barely noticed. They were talking intently, Sarah blushing and laughing. Alexa saw a veil of ecstasy over her pretty face. "Are you happy, Alexa?" William asked her. She tilted her head to look at her father, realizing that, just as with Harvey, this was the first time she had ever danced with him. "I am, Dad. I really am." "You're just like your mother," he blurted, and it's almost... She wondered what he was struggling to say. Uncanny? Unbearable? Everyone said how much they looked alike, and in turn, how Carlotta was the mirror image of her own mother, Beatrice. They shared each other's Venetian heritage, dark hair and trusting blue eyes. Such a surprise against the soft olive tone of their skin. "That's what Pa Ferris just said." She saw her father inhale his emotion. Dad would understand, Alexa ruminated as their dance continued, that it was time for her to leave home. She wanted to step outside of her small, safe world, and she wanted to find her grandmother. She would never be able to do that stuck here at Porthdean, perched on the furthest point you could get to before toppling into the sea. She had to tell Beatrice to her face how sorry she was, and that 6 years of silence had been agony. William slouched with relief as the number ended. Eleanor greeted them, handing out punch cups. Harvey and Sarah looked quite marvellous too. She was telling me earlier what an honour it was to be invited. Wouldn't have happened in the old days, having the whole village here. But that's Harvey's influence, I suspect. It's almost as if she's a charity case. Eleanor looked sharply over Alexa's shoulder. Oh, Sarah, did you enjoy your dance? Alexa, used to her stepmother's catty edge, turned to see Sarah next to her, flushed and breathing heavily, not sure what to do with her hands. I most certainly did, she said, tucking a damp tendril of hair behind her ear, although I must have trodden on Harvey's toes a dozen times. What's that you have there? Asked Alexa. Harvey's handkerchief, said Sarah. He apologised for the speed of the dance, for making me hot and bothered. He thought I'd better have this. She hid her beam of pleasure by dabbing her mouth and her cheeks with it. Eleanor caught Alexa's eye and excused herself with, I wonder where your father has gone, pulling Alexa behind her. Sarah better not be getting any ideas, said Eleanor. Alexa wanted to ask her stepmother what on earth she meant, but Harvey caught her by the arm and spun her around. I've done my duty, he said, his hand firmly on her spine. Now it's time to dance with the birthday girl again. Goodness, said Alexa. Now I'm hogging you. He gazed down at her appraisingly and in complete seriousness said, Happy birthday, my dear Alexa. She forced a laugh. Harvey's devotion, his interest, had baffled her shy young self at first. He was always the bigger boy who came across the headland from Ennis Point to Porthdean to ask her to come out to play. But William and Carlotta had liked him, encouraged her, and she fell easily into step with Harvey in their domain of cliffs and coves and rocks and waves, just as she matched his steps now across the floor. Dancing with him, she tried to parry his attention, but lost the battle. The intensity in his eyes silenced her. How could she have ignored it? How could she have ignored her oldest, dearest friend? All of this, the music, the light and the laughter, was for her. Always for her. The room and its dancing, joyous people revolved around her. Harvey's arms supporting her were no longer a comfort, and rather his presence shot warning signals up her body. This was not the first time he'd ever touched her, but it felt like it was. Her neck ached with trying to hold herself away from his embrace. He noticed and stopped her suddenly. He signalled to the band. The musicians went silent for the briefest spell and then struck up merrily with Happy Birthday. And as she forced herself to smile, she made herself think of her plans, of the unknown Lady Meredith, of London, her search for her grandmother, while her heart beat savagely and perspiration flashed over her skin. The song finished at last. Look at you, just look at you, Harvey smiled, as if seeing her for the first time. Alexa, you really don't know what it is you do. He lowered himself and knelt on the floor. The room gasped in collective amazement. Alexa, he said peacefully, confidently looking up at her. I've known you since you were a little girl. All your life, in fact. He was speaking as if there was no one else in the room. The air thickened. Dozens of eyes beamed at her. She raised her hands in surrender. Please, Harvey, not like this, she whispered. But he could not have heard her, for he was speaking, quickly, expectantly. Will you, my dearest Alexa, do me the honour of becoming my wife? The women surrounding her put their fingertips to their faces, eyes widening. Men settled their shoulders in satisfaction. As if frozen mid-tune, the band were poised with their instruments. William looked excited. Eleanor was listening hard. Sarah Carmichael stared in horror, her eyes moving in a slow frenzy. No one dared say a word, for they were all waiting for Alexa's answer. Harvey loved her, and she did not realise until that moment, as the look on his face told her over and over again. A shake of her head brought Harvey back to his feet. Fear darted across his face. "Don't make me a fool, Alexa," he whispered, his voice light and coaxing, not understanding. Behind his shoulder, Alexa glimpsed Betty Ferris, her face fixed with belief, her hands clenched before her. Beside her, Arthur was nodding gently. Neither of them had noticed the shake of her head or heard what their son had whispered. This is what they wanted. This is what they all expected. But this was not her. "I'm so sorry," she blurted and turned away. Bodies parted as she pressed through the slack-jawed crowd towards the French windows, open to the pale evening like the mouth of a dark cave from which she must escape. As she plunged out into the cooler air, it was like stepping into a cold shower of rain. Exclaims of shock and gasps of displeasure followed her. Dipping down, she hauled off her shoes, lifted her skirt, and ran. Part 1. Chapter 1. "I'm not allowed to paddle," Alexa called out, her voice carrying across the cove against the rushing of the waves. "Not today. Mamma said it is far too rough." "But I'm here," insisted Harvey, who'd already made a dash towards the sea. "Should anything happen, I'll pull you out. I'll rescue you. Come on, Alexa." "But look at the swell. It is rather choppy." "I'm going in." Harvey perched on a rock and hauled his shoes and socks off in one go, dropping them to the sand. He whipped his cap off, rolled up his trouser legs, and gave her a bright, encouraging grin. "Mamma will be very cross," said Alexa. "Come to the edge, then." Alexa followed him down to the spot where the foaming waves could just reach the tips of her shoes. She darted backward and forward, teased by the water, as, in a mild state of envy, she watched Harvey paddle. Just turned 16 and a good 4 years older than her, she could tell he knew he should be sensible and grown up, but desperately wanted to play. She gave him an amused little wave. "It is rather fresh," he laughed, as an unexpectedly large breaker soaked his trousers. The pearly blue sea was moving quickly. White crests forming far out suggested a hidden force, a danger that could easily, as Mamma would say, catch you while you weren't looking. "Why won't she let you go paddling?" hollered Harvey, now up to his knees, his legs pale against the rocking surf. "You know why. She's afraid of the water," said Alexa. "Ever since she was expecting me and she heard my voice inside her telling her not to get on the big ship. So she didn't, and it sunk." "It's all so dramatic," he said. "It has never made any sense to me." "Do you think it does to me?" she called back, laughing, even though here on the sand, watching Harvey splashing through the swell, with the salty wind whipping her hair and the song of the waves in her ear, her mother's tale of unborn Alexa's warning forced a hard thrill of terror to burrow through her stomach. "I wanted to take you sailing for your birthday. Indigo Moon is resealed and ready. She even has a new sail," Harvey said, making his slow way back towards her, his disappointment physical. "And now you tell me you're going away. Tomorrow." "Are you mad? Mamma certainly wouldn't want me to go sailing unless Dad came with us. Anyway, we are visiting my grandmother," she said. "She's Italian, so I'm to call her Nonna." "What's she like?" "I've never met her, not even seen a photograph." "But I won't see much of you when you get back," he said, "because you're going straight off to boarding school." "So are you, Harvey. And you only have a year left to go. I'm only just starting. And I don't want to. I want to stay here." Harvey stood on the sand, shivering, hopping from one bare foot to the other, making us do things or making us not do them. Speaking of which, Harvey looked past Alexa's shoulder and began to wave. She turned to see the silhouette of her mother at the top of the Porthdene cliff, calling, beckoning her home. "Time to go," said Alexa. "Mamma wants me to have an early night. Big day tomorrow. It must be 200 miles to London." "Probably even more," said Harvey, struggling to squeeze his wet feet into his socks. "All I know is we have to catch the milk train from Penzance at dawn." "You'll be up before the seagulls," said Harvey, settling his cap on his head. They picked their way back up the beach and began to climb the cliff path. Halfway up, where the track split into two, one way up to Porthdene, the other along and down to the village. Alexa stopped. "Goodness me," she said. "Look at this. I very nearly trod on it." By her shoe lay half a gull's eggshell, speckled olive green and dappled with brown, the colours of rock and sand. Gingerly picking it up, she peered inside. A tiny feather was stuck to something runny. "It's been ambushed," she said, dismayed. "Something's stolen this egg, split it, and eaten the chick." "Oh no, but here's the other half." Harvey bent down to pluck it from the cushiony grass at the side of the path. "The chick has pecked his way out. A successful hatching, I'd say. And now he's in a nest somewhere, mouth gaping, being constantly fed by his mother, who has probably by now run ragged." He gave it to Alexa, and she cradled the two halves of the shell delicately in her palms. "Is this my birthday present?" she asked, laughing. "I've not brought you anything else, so I expect it is." "Alexa!" Her mother's call reached them again. "I really must be going," said Alexa. But instead of making her way up to where Mama was waiting, she sat down on a tussock of grass. "Alexa, you will make her cross," said Harvey, "and I'm going to go before we both get into trouble." Alexa watched as Harvey made his way, following the flank of the cliff all the way down to the village. If Alexa leaned forward, she could just see the slate roofs and the smoking chimneys of Little Porthdean below, and the diminutive quay where 2 or 3 fishing luggers jostled for space. Her mother called again, but tucking her hands up inside her sleeves, Alexa decided to wait and watch Harvey walking along the quay. She spotted him as he emerged from behind the sea captain's cottage. Head down, cap pulled low, his tiny figure took the steep stone steps in great bounds and quickly reached the path that fed its way up and over the rising headland of Ennis Point, where the fresh wind combed the grasses, switching them back and forth. Harvey stopped suddenly, hands deep in pockets. She saw the pale shape of his face as he stared from his cliff top, across the water, to where she was sitting. She had no idea if he'd picked her out or not, and wondered if she should stand up, wave and call, give him a proper farewell. But, clutching her knees close to her chest, blending with the firs behind her, Alexa stayed completely still. Harvey turned, put his face to the wind and strode on his way. A hand rested on her shoulder and her mother was suddenly beside her, sitting on the grass. The breeze had teased her dark hair from under her hat. Her face, usually so expressive, was still. Alexa glanced at her, terrified that she was angry. "I'm sorry, Mama. I don't know why, but I just had to watch him go." Her mother reached out to tuck Alexa's wayward hair firmly behind her ears. "You should really wear a hat, darling, on a blowy day like today. Don't let Juliet catch you without one. You're not cross with me?" Mama shook her head, her eyes clear with understanding. "I know you'll miss him, Alexa, but we'll only be away a little more than a month. He will miss you too." A gust of wind battered Alexa, bringing with it a sudden and magnifying delight. But she ignored it. "You don't know that for sure, Mama." Her mother stood up and reached down for her. "Come on home. Juliet is making you supper. And Ovaltine if you ask her nicely." Alexa handed Mama one half of the precious eggshell to carry, and, together, they began the long climb back up the cliff. Chapter 2. The London cab negotiated a corner, swinging wide and forcing Alexa back hard against the seat. She jolted awake, surfacing from a fleeting but deep sleep into a frightening roar of traffic and a beeping of horns. And electric lights, so many lights dazzling her. Windows sparkled, strings of street lamps glowed. Row on row of towering buildings closed in on the street, disappearing up into a gloomy ceiling of evening sky. On the pavements, figures switched and huddled and hurried with hats on, heels clipping. The tobacco fumes breathed out by the driver threatened to smother her. She reached for Mama's hand. "Where are we?" she asked. "Just turned onto Piccadilly." The word was meaningless for Alexa. All she could think of was the yellow pickle that Juliet might give her with a nice slice of ham for her tea. "We'll be there in a moment," said Mama. "You fell asleep as soon as the taxi pulled away from the station. It's been such a long day. You must be shattered, darling. Oh, see the Ritz? But Alexa instead stared at the driver, appalled by the strong smells emanating from him and the thick roll. Dad's collar and neck were immaculate. He had driven them in the pale early dawn to the station at Penzance what seemed like an age ago, and was now at home at Porthdean with Juliet, in a separate world. The cab slowed and turned again, this time more decorously. The street was dark, narrow and quiet. Stately front doors were reached by sensible steps, illuminated eerily by the greenish yellow of gas lamps. Alexa could not quite believe that there were so many front doors in the world, so many houses, one after the other, after the other. Half Moon Street, Mamma leaned forward and called to the driver. This is it. She paid the man and tipped him. He in turn tipped his cap and the cab rumbled off. Alexa stood by her mother on the pavement and breathed in city air warm with the mineral scent of soot from 1,000 hearth fires. Where are we? She asked again. She glanced up at the white stucco house glowing in the darkness, the number 15 painted precisely in black on the pillar by the door. Her tummy was hollow with fatigue, her mouth sticky inside. She longed for Juliet's soothing words, her milky bedtime drink. Oh, Alexa, Alexa. Mamma bent down so that her face was level with hers in the shadow of her hat. Her olive skin was perfection. Her eyes were wet, and yet her smile was wide. Mamma, you're trembling. Can you believe that this was once my home? She asked, glancing up at the tall terraced house. A lamp glowed on the first floor. I lived here when I was a girl. It was only for a short time, but long enough for it to stay with me. And my nonna? Yes, she's here. She's at home. See the light burning? She said she'd leave it on for us, Carlotta said, urging Alexa towards the steep steps. Come on, Alexa, you're going to meet my mamma. Yes, I know that, said Alexa, although she did not know nearly enough. But why haven't I met her before? Mamma stopped halfway up the steps and gripped Alexa by the shoulders. She looked like she was searching for something on her face. Alexa knew that the tightening of Mamma's jaw and the stretching of the skin under her eyes meant that she was trying not to cry. A deep line stitched the space between her brows, and Alexa felt a tightening knot in her tummy. She could see that being here, outside Nonna's front door, was causing Mamma pain, but she didn't know why. Because, Mamma sighed. Because there was a time when we weren't speaking to each other. But a little while ago, I wrote to Nonna, and eventually she wrote back. So here we are. Mamma pulled the long bell cord, and they waited nervously, trying so very hard to understand. Alexa asked, Mamma, does Nonna know that it will soon be my birthday? Oh, Alexa, yes indeed she does, and that's why we're here. Mamma's laughter sounded like the snatch of a happy tune as the front door opened. Rooms were stacked one on top of the other, and Alexa lost count of how many flights of stairs she climbed and how many lamplit landings she traipsed along on her drowsy way up to bed. Mamma opened the door onto a warm, dark room where a gas lamp was popping and the bed covers were being drawn back by a maid. As she pulled on her pyjamas, Alexa heard a lady by the bedroom door talking softly in Italian. Getting into bed, she watched Mamma fleetingly embrace her before the lady disappeared along the landing. I'll say good night then, said her mother, beginning to close the bedroom door. Is that Nonna? Alexa called out, not wanting to be left alone. Yes, she whispered back. You will meet her properly in the morning. Mamma, I won't be able to sleep now, Alexa said, sitting up, suddenly wide awake. There's too much to think about. There always is with you, Mamma sighed, coming back into the room and sitting by her bed. Here, I forgot. The maid has brought you milk. Alexa knew that it wouldn't be like Juliet's. Tell me the story again, Mamma, she said, leaving the cup where it was on the bedside table. The one where I warned you from inside your tummy. About the ship, Mamma said abruptly. Oh no, please don't ask for that, not here. Mamma tilted her face away. Even with the light spilling in from the landing, Alexa could not read her expression. Please, Mamma, I will never sleep. Her mother took in a sharp breath. Alexa waited, and when at last she spoke, her words were like shattered glass. Look, Alexa. No. I'm telling you no. That's enough. Now drink your milk. I probably won't, said Alexa, hating how grumpy and tired she felt. Then sleep, said Mamma, planting a kiss on her forehead, closing the door behind her as she left the room. The first thing Alexa saw when she woke was a still full cup of milk, stone cold on the bedside table. In the bed opposite her, Mamma lay snoozing. She turned over and listened to the noises of the house. A man's voice rumbled and a door shut below. Her dream of home still clung to her like gossamer cobwebs. The essence of Porthdene, the house of silvery granite with its mullioned windows and crooked chimneys, the weight of the sea below and the calls of seagulls above, and Harvey paddling in the sea, seemed to be still part of her as she yawned and stretched. Hearing a chink of bottles from outside, Alexa wriggled out from under the covers and padded across to the window in half-darkness. She slipped in front of the drawn curtains and peered down to the sunny street. A milkman was unloading his wares from his cart, chattering with someone unseen below, while his horse waited patiently, one hoof lifted off the cobbles. She saw a man in pinstripes, wearing a bowler hat and carrying a briefcase, stride along on the other side of the road, and a maid in a cap and apron sweeping the steps of the house opposite. Another man on crutches, his legs strangely truncated, hobbled up the curb. A car tooted around the corner, and in the distance, the faint chatter of traffic. A knock on the bedroom door roused her mother, who sat up in bed and called groggily, "Come in." The maid, who had drawn back the bedcovers last night, came through with a tray laden with teapot, toast and marmalade and set it on the table by the window. She opened the curtains, and sunlight revealed the dark corners of the room. "Signora thought you'd like breakfast up here this morning, madam. She'll be in the morning room when you're ready." Mamma thanked her and reached for her hairbrush. She smoothed her hair down, then she gestured for Alexa to tackle hers. She got up, eased her feet into slippers, found both of their dressing gowns, and finally, seated at the little table by the window, they were ready for breakfast. "Did you sleep well, Alexa?" "I dreamt about home." "You're missing it already." Mamma lifted the lid on the teapot and gave it a stir. "And how do you like my old bedroom?" Alexa took a bite of toast and looked around. Her mother's queen-sized bed had a forest green canopy that matched the shade of the wallpaper. The parquet floor was polished to the colour of honey and laid with a Turkish rug. Watercolours and gilt frames depicted the drowning Italian city with its churches and palaces shimmering like pewter above the water. "I like the pictures," Alexa said. "That's Venice, isn't it?" Yes, clever girl. Maybe one day we will take you there. Dad and I and Juliet can come too. You will love it as much as I miss it." Alexa gave her a glance, and Mamma elaborated. "You know when you hear me singing in Italian, that's because I'm thinking about Venice." Mamma sipped her hot tea, and Alexa noticed that the steam was making her eyes water. "And when you see the city for yourself, you'll know why. You'll want to sing too." "And what a lot of dolls, Mamma," said Alexa, pointing to the cabinet where a delegation of dolls sat with frozen faces and unblinking eyes. "Oh yes, they all have names. But you know the only thing I wanted to bring with me was my button box." Alexa nibbled her toast in the comforting glow of a happy memory. She loved Mamma's casket. It was filled with buttons, one for every costume, coat and dress that had ever been made for her since she'd been a baby. Juliet had seen to that, for before Juliet was Alexa's nanny, she'd been Mamma's. It was a treat for Alexa to have Juliet fetch the box from her Mamma's bedroom so that she could explore and count them all. But she hadn't done so for a long while. After all, she was a big girl. She'd be 12 on Midsummer's Eve. Her mind drifted back to her dream and to home, and she wondered what Dad might be doing. He breakfasted early, so he'd be out now walking his land. He often took her with him to visit the cottages and call in on farms, walking up to the blustery top fields, following the tumble-down walls. When she was little, she'd scamper off to hunt for pixies under hedgerows, to listen for their singing, hoping to see them dancing around the old stone circle on the top of the hill. "There's a saying around here," her father had once said, "that Porthdean is the first and last house in England. Certainly feels that way some days, doesn't it, Alexa, when the wind blows in? The ends of the earth." She swallowed her last bit of toast and asked her mother, "Has Dad ever been here?" "Not here, in this bedroom," Mamma laughed. "How unseemly. But he visited the house, of course he did. We met at a ball in Belgrave Square. Such a wonderful time. Summer of 1910. Alexa listened to the tender drift of her mother's voice. Seems so long ago. A great many things have happened since then. Alexa wanted to ask what things precisely, but her imagination was sparking with the notion that this had been Mamma's bedroom, that they were Mamma's dolls. The strangeness of her situation gripped her. Being inside a towering house sandwiched between other houses in a city filled with people, it was all so far from home. "Is this your dad's house, Mamma?" she asked. "No, my darling, this is Grandpa Montgomery's house. Remember I told you all about it? Oh, perhaps you don't." Mamma paused, sipped her tea. She watched Alexa warily, softening her voice. "My father, Pietro, died when I was a little girl. I barely remember him, but I'm told he was a fine gentleman, just like Dad, actually." "Who told you?" "Juliet." Mamma smiled on a memory. "And we came to live here on Half Moon Street when Nonna, my mother, married Grandpa Montgomery, who, Alexa, you must call Mr. Montgomery, not Grandpa, unless he corrects you otherwise." Baffled, Alexa grasped at something she knew for sure. "I was born in Venice." Alexa sat up straight. "Is he downstairs?" "Lots of questions," said Mamma, glancing at her watch. "If you mean Mr. Montgomery, I think he might be. Oh, but perhaps now—" She read the time again. "He could well be at his office." "Does he wear a bowler hat?" asked Alexa, thinking of the man hurrying along the street. "Does he run along the pavement to work?" Mamma laughed. "No, his driver takes him. Now eat your toast." "Oh, Mamma." "One more, then we must get bathed and dressed and go and see Nonna. We don't want to keep her waiting." "Who is that person with you?" Alexa pointed to the silver-framed photograph on the bookcase. "That's not Dad, is it?" "That's Luke Montgomery," she said. "My stepbrother." The photograph was of Mamma in a garden wearing a pale dress. Rather old-fashioned and rather long, Alexa thought, with too much lace around the shoulders. The toes of her shoes peeped out from below the hem, and a large hat shielded her face. Next to her, linking her arm, was a young man in tennis clothes, laughing hard. "Where is he? Luke, is he here too?" she asked, thinking that her mother and the man in the photograph looked so young and playful. "Oh, no, darling. He's dead." Mamma opened the door to the bathroom and emerged barefooted, her hair wrapped in a towel turban, steam cascading around her. "Such a luxury," she said, "to have this adjoining bath. I must ask Dad if we can have one put in at home. En suite, they call it. Aren't you getting ready, Alexa?" Alexa shook her head and looked down at her dressing gown. "I think the bottle green for you. I've hung it up, see," said Mamma. Mamma sat in front of her dressing table, unwrapped her hair so that it fell in almost black locks, soaking the shoulders of her dressing gown. She picked up her hairbrush. "But I don't like the bottle green. It's so very old hat," said Alexa, looking at the shirt-waisted dress with the white piping hanging on the wardrobe door. It was meant for a child much younger than her, not for a girl very nearly 12. "I want to wear the indigo blue." Mamma stopped brushing her hair and beckoned Alexa over. Alexa knew exactly what she'd done wrong and knew not to speak until Mamma allowed her. Standing by her side, she watched her mother's reflection in the mirror. Her expressive mouth, that rounded chin, Even the curve of her nostril was exactly like her own, and the look in both of their eyes was of disappointment. "You must do as I ask." "But I—" Mamma lifted a finger. "I can see it, Alexa. That little Latin spark on your face, like a light going on. I know it means trouble. I'm the same. Try to squash it when you feel it. I do all the time." "A spark?" "Juliet used to tell me off for it." "When I can't bear not to say something?" "Exactly that. You must wear your bottle green today and save your indigo blue." Alexa began to tap the dressing table leg with her toe. She tugged at the button on her dressing gown, yanking the thread, punishing it. "Look what you're doing. Oh, my dear, you've pulled your button off. Don't lose it. We'll take it home and Juliet can sew it back on for you." "Can I put it in your button box instead?" she asked. "Of course you can." Mamma's anger faded. "Now get yourself ready. We don't want to keep Nonna waiting." Mamma led the way downstairs, bright and fresh in her crimson dress with the big rosette on her hip. Alexa followed in her bottle green, dragging her hands along the banisters, her tummy fizzing. She must not protest about the dress, for she didn't want to see that look on Mamma's face again. She must be good and keep quiet. Mamma stopped Alexa on the second landing and drew her mouth close to her ear. "When we're downstairs, try not to ask too many questions, Alexa," she whispered. "Try to button them up. Remember what I have told you." "You mean squash myself down?" Mamma's eyes brightened. "Exactly that. You must let us ladies speak, for we have not seen each other. Well, not since you were a scrap of a baby." Alexa was prickly with confusion. Sometimes she couldn't speak, couldn't express the words tumbling through her head. Other times her voice just spurted out of her. "Say yes, Mamma," said her mother. "Yes, Mamma." The maid met them at the bottom of the staircase, led the way along a corridor and opened a door. Alexa followed Mamma into a drawing room, stretching the length of the house, with windows at either end, reaching the ceiling. Sunlight beamed under the blinds, glimmering fiercely on glass domes encasing stuffed birds and on the waxy leaves of plants. Pleated lampshades and gilded picture frames peppered the walls. The cloistered air smelt powdery. A vast arrangement of flowers was dropping its petals onto the polished surface of a table. Alexa felt small and younger than she'd ever done before. A lilting voice said, "Let me have a proper look at you, child." Alexa peered through the maze of dark and monstrous furniture to spot the owner of the command. An older lady sitting in a high-backed armchair by the fire. Alexa glanced up at her mother in confusion. This was, and her resemblance to her mother, the way she dipped her head and turned her shoulder, the Italian music in her accent, bewildered her. The lady squinted through a shaft of sunlight and gestured impatiently. Alexa took a tentative step into the room and saw her own clear, questioning eyes peering at her from within an older face. "Say good morning to Nonna," said Mamma. Alexa slipped her hand into her Mamma's and they moved forward together. "She's just like you, Carlotta," said the lady. She gently grasped Alexa's shoulders in the way that Mamma often did when something important was about to happen, and moved her gently so that she stood directly in front of her. As Beatrice Montgomery fixed her in her gaze, Alexa saw her brow break into furrows, her eyes grow wet. Her mouth was moving with unexpressed emotion. "The years have overtaken us, haven't they, Carlotta? I cannot believe the child is 11. We can't let it happen again, for this one's sake." Remembering to squash herself down, just as her mother had told her to, Alexa swallowed her urge to remind her grandmother that she was very nearly 12. Mamma sat down and nodded to Alexa that she should too. "Alexa is growing so very fast, Mamma. She's going to boarding school in September," said her mother. "A lovely school on Bodmin Moor, not too far away. We've heard it is a very good school. We feel it will be best for her." Nonna raised her eyebrows. "Indeed, it will be." Alexa sank beneath her grandmother's stare. She didn't feel it would be best for her. She wanted to stay home with Mama and read all the books in Dad's library. Surely that could be her education. And when would she ever see Harvey? The dreadful idea of leaving Porthdean struggled to form in her mind, so she let it go. "And where is step-papa?" Mama asked. "In the city, of course," said Beatrice. "He leaves stupendously early these days and comes home very late. Works so hard. I take it you slept well?" While the ladies spoke to each other, Alexa studied her grandmother. The colour of her skin had the same quality as Mama's, rich and olive. But her face was divided by lines, her features soft, their edges blurred. Her hair could have been Mama's and yet was flecked with grey, while Mama's was as rich as a blackbird's wing. And even though Nonna looked fiercer, she somehow seemed more fragile. Realising that she should not stare, Alexa took in the busy trappings of the drawing room and landed on the circular table filled with a battalion of framed pictures. There were no pictures of Mama, and no pictures of her, photographs of a growing boy, a vibrant sketch of a young man, photographs of an older gentleman with Nonna and the young man. In another, the young man was standing proudly beside a bride, her white dress a waterfall of lace. All the same young man as in the photograph upstairs in her mother's bedroom. All Luke Montgomery. And Mama said he died, just like Arnold the gardener. Alexa had sat at the top of the stairs at Porthdean with Juliet when she was a very little girl, while below in the hallway the servants had gathered around her father reading out a telegram, the flimsy paper trembling in his hand. Women had dabbed their eyes and men had looked at the floor. Juliet had held her tightly, whispering that Arnold had gone. Alexa had not understood then, when they'd spoken of Flanders and the trenches and the legions of lost men. She had still not understood when later they'd said that Sarah's father, Mr. Carmichael, would not be returning home to the village. But she did now. She must have made a startled noise, for her grandmother and mother stopped talking, turned towards her. "Did Luke die in the war?" Alexa blurted, unable to squash herself any more. "Oh, Alexa," Mama sighed. Nonna's eyes were on her like a lightning strike, pinning Alexa into her chair. "Is that what your Mama has told you?" she demanded. Alexa wriggled in her chair, struggling to respond. Eventually her mother spoke for her. "No, Mama, I have not told Alexa anything." Her grandmother's eyes flashed back at her daughter, and, in terrible silence, Alexa watched the two women stare at each other, linked by vibrating and inexplicable pain. "May I suggest, then," said her grandmother, her voice small and even, "that we all go out and get a little fresh air?" They left the quiet haven of Half Moon Street, turned a corner or two, and soon met with the busy thoroughfare. Alexa felt herself shrink amid the traffic chaos, not daring to breathe the fumes. Beyond the line of iron railings, past the barrier of noise and chaos, on the other side of the road lay the park, a swathe of undulating, shimmering green. The grass was sheltered by avenues of trees and dotted with deck chairs, some empty and some filled with snoozing, chatting people resting under the shade of parasols. Mama approached a policeman and asked him to help them cross the road. He blew his whistle and, like a miracle, cars and buses slowed their pace. As Alexa stepped bravely down the curb, Nonna gripped her by the hand. Alexa looked up at her in surprise and chanced to smile, expecting one back. Instead, her grandmother glanced this way and that, as if... Once safely through the gates, Alexa shook off her grandmother's hand and hurtled free. Mama called for her not to go far, but Alexa knew that she need not worry about cliffs and the deep sea and the crashing waves here. The park was safe, the grass soft under her shoes, daisies colonising it like stars. She ran past nannies with perambulators, a gang of young boys chasing a dog. She scooted past gentlemen brandishing canes, walking with ladies who were showing their ankles beneath their swishing skirts. She dodged a man in a wheelchair with medals pinned down his front, being pushed along like a pensioner might be, although he wasn't elderly at all. He was one of the soldiers who had returned, Alexa decided, like the man hopping along Half Moon Street that morning. He gave her a shy smile, but her attention was taken by the enormous white house guarded by regal gates just visible through the trees. With questions bubbling on her lips, Alexa turned around. Her mother and grandmother were a long way back on the path, walking slowly, talking quietly. They were, Alexa concluded, as beautiful as each other, exactly the same height, Mama in her shorter skirt and Nonna in a longer length, but equally fashionable. With ostrich feathers on their hats and silk stoles lifted by the sunlit breeze, they looked like two fluttering butterflies. Alexa ran towards them. Whatever pain she had caused them by mentioning Luke had vanished, and she was bursting to ask them about the large house, the park, everything. But knew she mustn't. She really mustn't. She stood, her knee jigging with impatience, waiting for them to stop talking. "Beautiful day. Just look at it," said Nonna. "It's as if London has breathed a huge sigh of relief. The darker times are over. There's a different atmosphere, Carlotta. You can feel it. There's a laughter, a music. People are lifted." "Is it hope, do you think, Mama? 10 years after it all started?" asked Mama. "A fresh start after all of the horror, all of the loss?" "Yes," said Nonna, and linked her arm through Mama's. "It is a new beginning." Mama flinched at her mother's touch, and they both remained quite still, as if they'd surprised themselves. "There was a new jazz band on at the Ritz last week. Your steppapa would not go, but I quite fancied it. Ah, you can see Buckingham Palace. It's been a long while since—" Spotting Alexa, they took a step back, broke apart. "We're thinking of some treats for your birthday," said Mama. "How about tea at the Ritz?" said Nonna, bestowing an uncomfortable smile. "And a trip to the zoo?" Alexa began to "Simmer down, Alexa. Not so lively," said her grandmother. "You're going to be 12, not 2. Mama said, "You'll never guess what else I have planned, Alexa. I'm going to have my hair bobbed. Dad would not let me before. He said he could not trust a hairdresser in little old Truro. But now I'm in London, it's high time. Nonna knows a salon on Brook Street. Oh, can I come too, please? And," her grandmother said, "I don't think Monsieur Etienne is the place for a child." Alexa's joy drained to her shoes. "But," Nonna raised another smile, "when Mama has had her hair done in a few days' time, we are going to sit in my drawing room and have our portraits painted in oils, or 3 of us, together, to mark your visit and your birthday. Won't that be splendid, Alexa? Won't it be a perfectly grown-up thing to do?" But Alexa was not listening. The inky mass of Mama's hair coiling at the nape of her neck fascinated her suddenly, now that she knew it would soon be all gone. It looked heavy, there under the back of her hat, her neck so slender beneath. "But your hair, Mama?" she asked, sadness dragging inside her. Part of her mother would be gone, thrown in a bin. "I want to wear the new cloche hats," Mama said. "You mean you want to be a flapper?" said Nonna. Mama laughed. "I think I'm a bit too old for that." Alexa asked, "When they've cut it off, Mama, what will they do with all your hair? Can I keep it?" "I'm never sure if the child is being rude or not," uttered Nonna, "but I can see where she gets it from. You were just like that, Carlotta, when you were her age." Alexa looked from her mother to her grandmother and back again, realizing suddenly where she came from. First one lady, and then the next, and then her. The idea grinded, made her uncomfortably aware of her own skin, and she shrank inside it, remembering that she should let the lady speak and remain quiet. "Well, Alexa," demanded her grandmother in the stretching silence, "wouldn't a portrait of all 3 of us be a splendid thing?" Alexa looked again at her mother, who was nodding furiously at her. "Yes, Nonna," Alexa said at last. An absolutely splendid thing.
Ah, just like your mother, Nonna said. And that reminds me. After we'd arranged your visit, I had a bit of a clear-out. I found this.
She rummaged in her handbag and drew out a photograph. "Oh my!" cried Mamma and began to laugh. "Oh, look at that. That was taken right by your palazzo, Mamma. I haven't seen this for years." She craned her neck, leaned in, and eventually her mother passed it to her. There was Mamma with Juliet, captured in sepia when Mamma was a girl, growing up in Venice. And yet it could have been Alexa posing there on the little bridge over the water, with the sun casting hard shadows over their hats and their dresses, and Juliet's striped stockings visible at her jauntily posed ankles. Alexa guessed that Mamma was the same age she was now, with her dark hair brushing her waist and her pale eyes laughing. And Juliet, a young woman with hair in a top-knot bun and her sun-browned face. Alexa would know her wise and gentle smile anywhere. "I want to go to Venice," cried Alexa in a searing rush of passion. "I want to stand on that bridge with you and Juliet, Mamma." Her mother cocked an eyebrow. "Oh, and you too, Nonna." Her grandmother fixed her once more with her unrelenting gaze.
"Perhaps, then, you like this photograph, Alexa?" she asked, her voice surprisingly kind.
"Oh, she will treasure it," said Mamma eagerly. "Won't you, Alexa?" But Alexa did not answer. She stared into the picture, absorbing every inch of it as it took her dreams around a new and magical corner. Chapter 3. The artist set his easel up in front of Beatrice's drawing-room windows. He laid out tubes of paint, a pot of brushes, and a palette with meticulous care. He had all manner of equipment: rags, pencils, charcoal, a ream of large, robust sheets of paper. Alexa watched him from the doorway, making herself smaller against the door jamb while the maid offered him tea. He had his back to Alexa, busying himself, accepting the refreshment. As the maid hurried to the door, she gave Alexa a little shake of her head. "Miss Alexa, wait for your mother and Signora to come down," she said as she breezed past. "Don't disturb the gentleman while he's settling in." Alexa eased herself quietly into the room, sidling around the furniture. She was wearing her favourite dress at last, the new indigo silk, embroidered with coils of ribbon. "Yes, perfect," Mamma had said while they were getting ready. "The blue catches the colour of your eyes. Dad will approve. He will be so happy when he sees the painting." But watching the artist prepare in Nonna's drawing room, Alexa regretted her choice. For it was a winter dress, not a summer one, and the day was becoming very warm. The sky was grey and opaque and the air thickening. She had only had the dress for half an hour, and already the high neck was damp and itchy. As she crept around one of Nonna's occasional tables, the toe of her patent shoe accidentally knocked a leg. The artist turned around, and Alexa squeaked in surprise. His eyes were sparkling and friendly, as if he was smiling broadly, but she could not tell, for a mask covered the lower part of his face. The curving metal surface concealed his chin and his mouth and gleamed dully, unnaturally, in the cloudy light through the window. "Good morning, miss," he said, his voice rich with kindness. "I'm Mr. Jack Fairling. Are you Miss Rosewarne? It's a pleasure to meet you." "And you too, sir." She stayed where she was, fixing herself close to Nonna's mahogany sideboard. Mesmerised by the mask and what it might be hiding, she'd forgotten how to breathe. No wonder the maid had given her a warning look. "Shall I tell you what I'm going to do today?" The artist took out a rag and wiped his hands. "Then you know what to expect." Alexa nodded. She inched across the room, circumnavigating the jumble of chairs and whatnots. Closer to him, Alexa realised that the parts of his face that she could see, his forehead and across his nose, were wrinkled, resembling delicate parchment. But still his eyes beamed at her. "Don't mind my face, Miss Rosewarne," said Mr. Fairling. "The war has a lot to answer for." "Like the man with the medals in the wheelchair, the man hopping along the street. Is the war answering for them too?" she asked. The artist glanced at her, understanding.
"I believe that it is indeed," he said, and asked her if she'd kindly sit in the chair, placed just so in front of her grandmother's curtains. He picked up a stick of charcoal and told her he was going to use it to make initial sketches of her mother and grandmother, and her, of course, if she would be obliged. Clamping a sheet of paper to the easel, he dashed his charcoal over it before Alexa even had time to pose. "That's perfect, miss. I'm just doing preliminary sketches. We want you to be natural. Look towards the window, please."
Mr. Fairling opened the sash, and air rolled lazily through the gap to caress her hands and her face. But Alexa still felt so terribly warm. A film of moisture settled on her top lip, and she hoped he would not include the perspiration in her portrait. He sketched some more, focusing on her each time for brief moments before snapping back to his easel. "Does it hurt, sir?" A light switched off in Mr. Fairling's eyes, but behind the mask, a smile lifted his destroyed cheeks.
"Not anymore, miss."
Mr. Fairling took out a handkerchief, lifted his mask a fraction and dabbed his face. "Is it hot under there?" she asked, and he laughed.
"Ah, Mr. Fairling, so glad that you've settled in. You started without us,"
called her grandmother, progressing across the drawing room. How beautiful they looked. Nonna's gown was a rich midnight navy. Mamma's a confection of floating panels in a light blue silk. Her newly bobbed hair was bouncing, shinier than ever, her years falling away. She looked as happy and as buoyant as a child. "Don't you look a picture, Alexa?" said Mamma.
"That's the idea,"
said the artist. As the adults laughed together, Alexa softened beneath her mother's compliment. She felt now that she could look where she liked, instead of trying not to stare at Mr. Fairling. She slipped off the chair and went towards Mamma. But Mamma turned her face away quickly to smother a hard cough.
"I heard you upstairs earlier, Carlotta," said Nonna. "Are you feeling all right?"
Mamma said, "Oh, do excuse me. It started this morning. Must have been breathing too much London air. Remember, I'm used to living by the sea."
"You do look a little flushed,"
conceded Nonna. "We all do," Mamma laughed. "The weather is not being kind to us ladies today." Nonna settled herself in the spot Alexa had vacated.
"Now, Mr. Fairling," she said, "you make sure you get my best side."
"Oh, that's something I can't ever ask for myself," he said, and above the metal he winked at Alexa and glanced out of the window. "There's a storm coming. See how the sky is darkening? But I like this," the artist said. "The stormy light is creating a certain magic here, almost as if we're underwater." After Mr. Fairling had sketched Nonna, it was Mamma's turn to sit in the chair. While Mr. Fairling outlined her, Nonna poured tea and a quietness settled, broken only by the scratching of the charcoal over paper, the chink of teaspoon against china, and Mamma and Nonna regaling Mr. Fairling about the beauty of Venice. Alexa listened and watched, entranced, as the artist swiftly captured the